A thick fog clung to the town of Elmbrook like the memory of a forgotten trauma. It was a quiet place, tucked between crumbling hills and dying forests, the kind of town no one ever really chose to live in. It simply absorbed people, like dampness into old wood. Gavin Miles arrived under a sky the color of ash. His car sputtered into town just as the rain began to fall, not in sheets, but in a fine mist that seemed to coat everything with a film of unease. The welcome to Elmbrook sign was half obscured by vines, and the population count had been crossed out in red paint. He didn't have a plan. He hadn't had one in years. At one time, Gavin had been a rising star in investigative journalism, award-winning exposés, national headlines, but then came the scandal, a story built on fabricated quotes, a rushed deadline, a ruined reputation. Now, he was just a man chasing ghost stories in forgotten towns. This one had called to him literally. He first heard about Elmbrook in an online forum for amateur urban explorers. A thread titled "The Town Where They Disappear." It was full of half-baked theories, blurry photos, cryptic anecdotes, but something about it felt different. There were names, dates, patterns, and then, buried deep in the comments, a user named Secot74 had posted, "They whisper from the tunnels, they take the ones who listen." Gavin had stared at those words for hours. Now he was here, parked outside a faded building labeled Elmbrook General Store, the lights inside long dead. He took a deep breath and grabbed his bag. The only open business on Main Street was a bar called the Hollow Tap, lit by a flickering neon beer sign. It was early afternoon, but the place was already dim and sour-smelling. A few old men hunched over their drinks at the bar. None of them looked up when Gavin entered. He approached the bartender, a wiry woman with a cigarette dangling from her lips. "Room for rent?" Gavin asked, pulling a crumpled photo of a sign he'd seen online. "Room above, tap cash only, no questions." She looked him over, exhaled smoke, and nodded toward a narrow staircase. "Second floor keys, on the hook, don't make noise after midnight." The room was dusty and small. One bed, one lamp, a cracked mirror. The window faced the church. It loomed at the end of Main Street, old and hunched, like it had grown there rather than been built. Blackened stone, a rusted gate. The steeple was crooked, like a broken finger pointing at something deep in the sky. As night fell, Gavin sat on the bed and opened his notebook. He wrote 3 names. Iris Wren, 17. Vanished 3 weeks ago after choir practice. Calvin Wright, 26. Last seen hiking near Grey Hollow Asylum ruins. Thomas Bell, 9. Disappeared from his backyard. There were others, 9, by Gavin's count, all in the last 2 years, all unexplained. He tapped the pen against his teeth. Something was wrong with this town. He could feel it like pressure behind his eyes. A sudden tapping on the window made him jump. He turned. Nothing there, just the church, backlit by a sickle moon. But then, a sound very faint. A whisper. He moved closer, pressed his ear to the glass. "Gavin?" His breath caught his bum around, heart hammering. Nothing, just the room, just silence. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Gavin woke to the sound of distant church bells. They rang at odd intervals, long, uneven chimes that didn't seem tied to any traditional hour. He rose from the bed, mind foggy from lack of sleep. The whispers from the night before still clung to the edges of his memory, like something he'd dreamed but couldn't quite forget. After a lukewarm coffee at the tap, he headed to the Elmbrook Public Records Office, a squat concrete building wedged between the fire station and a boarded-up bakery. It smelled of mildew and resignation. The clerk, a pale man with watery eyes, barely looked up. "I'm researching disappearances in the area," Gavin said. The man didn't blink. "Plenty of those. I mean recent ones, last 2 years." Silence. Then the man stood, shuffled into the back room, and returned with a battered manila folder. Gavin opened it. Inside, photocopies of missing persons reports, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes in the margins. Each page was like a wound. Iris Wren, last seen near the old church. Calvin Wright, found only his boots beside the Grey Hollow Trail. Thomas Bell, mother said he followed the voices. They all vanished within a 5-mile radius. No bodies, no evidence. "What's this margin note?" Gavin asked, pointing to a phrase repeated across several pages. "Echoed." The clerk hesitated. "People say, the ones who vanish don't just disappear, they echo like a voice calling down a well. You hear them even after they're gone." Gavin leaned in. "You mean people hear their voices?" "Not exactly, it's more like a thought that doesn't belong to you, a memory that never happened. Later that day, Gavin visited Iris Wren's house. It was a two-story colonial just off Lantern Street. Her mother, Ellen Wren, looked tired and pale, but agreed to speak. She wasn't troubled. She insisted. Smart, quiet. She sang in the church choir. Her voice cracked. She was happy. Did she say anything odd before she disappeared? Mrs. Wren nodded slowly. She started talking in her sleep, whispering things not in her voice, and she drew symbols. She handed Gavin a sketchbook. The pages were filled with tangled spirals, sharp triangles, and looping glyphs that made Gavin's head ache to look at. One phrase kept appearing between the drawings, beneath. Back in his room that night, Gavin pinned photocopies to the wall, marking the disappearances with pushpins. The center of the pattern was unmistakable. Grey Hollow Asylum. It had been abandoned for 30 years after a fire gutted the East Wing. Rumors of mistreatment, illegal experiments, and auditory hallucination research surrounded it. He stared at the map until his eyes blurred. Then, another whisper. This time, clearer. Calm down. He turned. The room was empty. But the whisper was inside him now. He fell asleep at the desk, dreaming of spirals that never ended. Grey Hollow Asylum loomed like a broken monument to forgotten horrors. Its shattered windows and charred walls cast long shadows in the afternoon sun. Gavin felt a chill as he stepped through the rusted gate, the scent of damp earth and burnt timber heavy in the air. The townspeople rarely spoke of Grey Hollow, but whispers of what had happened there swirled beneath their wary gazes. Experiments on patients, voices that drove people mad, and strange disappearances that even the police refused to investigate. Gavin's footsteps echoed through the empty halls. Graffiti covered the walls, some crude scrawls, others more disturbing, twisted faces and symbols that mirrored the ones Iris had drawn. He found the records room, surprisingly intact amidst the decayed dust-covered ledgers. Detailed patient files, many with notes on auditory hallucinations and unexplained phenomena. One entry caught his eye. Patient 27. Reports hearing voices beneath the walls. Describes whispers calling his name. Condition worsened until disappearance during night shift. The deeper he explored, the heavier the air grew. A low hum seemed to emanate from beneath the floorboards. Suddenly, a sharp whisper cut through the silence. Below. Gavin's heart raced as he followed the sound to a sealed doorway. Hidden behind debris, scratches and symbols were etched into the wood, warnings or perhaps invitations. Against better judgment, he forced the door open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The whispers grew louder. He grabbed his flashlight and descended, each step taking him closer to a place where sanity frayed and reality twisted. The stairwell descended deeper than it should have. Gavin counted more than 50 steps before the walls changed. Moss-covered stone gave way to smooth, dark concrete. The flashlight flickered as if protesting his choice. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of rot and wet soil. Then he reached the bottom. A long corridor stretched ahead, partially caved in, lined with rusted doors that led to forgotten rooms. But the real horror was the whispers, dozens of them, layered and overlapping like a sick choir. Gavin? Don't listen. Help us. Come closer. Some were pleading, others angry, a few excited. He passed a door with a shattered window inside, an old operating table, restraints still attached on the walls. Words etched in nails. They feed on memory. Suddenly footsteps. Not echoes, not imagined real behind him. He spun, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Nothing. But now the whispers had grown into voices, not just in his ears, but in his head. They clawed at his thoughts, urging him deeper. At the end of the corridor was a gate, marked with the same spiral symbol Iris had drawn behind it. A narrow shaft plunged straight down an old mining tunnel, perhaps. He hesitated, but the pull was unbearable. He descended again. Metal runs slick with condensation and rust. The further down he went, the more memories he began to lose. His sister's name, the smell of his childhood home, his first byline. Gone. In their place, fragments of lives he never lived. A girl singing in Latin, a man screaming in a padded room, a child laughing in the dark. Then, suddenly, he emerged into a vast cavern. The walls pulsed faintly, like breathing. At the center, a stone pedestal, and above it, a shape, not a creature, not a god. A presence. It turned toward him, though it had no eyes. He felt it like a hook in his skull. It knew him, it had always known him. And it whispered, directly into his bones. We remember what you forget. Gavin screamed, but no sound came out. Gavin awoke lying on cold stone. For a moment, he couldn't remember his own name then. Like breath drawn through a cracked window, memory returned, but it felt thinner, somehow borrowed. The cavern was silent now, the whispers gone. Or hiding. He stood slowly, body aching. The strange altar still stood in the center of the chamber, but the entity that had spoken to him, if it was real, was gone. Around the chamber walls were alcoves, inside each a mirror, dozens of them, mounted in ornate iron frames. They reflected not the chamber, but rooms, bedrooms, classrooms, bathrooms, scenes from lives that didn't belong to him. One showed a girl singing in a church choir, Iris ran. Another showed a little boy chasing a red ball, Thomas Bell. The mirrors were watching. And then, one mirror flickered and showed himself in this exact chamber, eyes black, whispering something to no one. He stepped back in horror. He turned away only to find the altar now covered in pages, dozens of them, torn from notebooks and sketchpads. On them, symbols, names, scribbles in blood and ink, words like host, carrier, and over and over. It comes through memory. Gavin understood, then. This wasn't just a haunting, it wasn't a place that fed on fear. It fed on thought, on recollection, on the echoes of who people had been. And the ones who had disappeared, they hadn't died. They had been consumed, their identities unraveled and stitched into something else, something that lived beneath the waking world. A sudden, sharp cry broke the silence. He spun toward the shaft. Someone was climbing down. A flashlight bobbing. A figure emerged, young, maybe late 20s, wide-eyed and trembling. "Help me," the man stammered. I heard them. I thought it was my brother. He disappeared 2 years ago." Gavin tried to speak to warn him, but a whisper rose again, not from the cavern, not from the walls. From inside Gavin's own mouth. "Come closer." The other man froze. What did you say?" Gavin clutched his throat, horrified. The whispers weren't just around him now, they were using him. He ran. Blindly. Down tunnels that twisted like intestines, past bones, old toys, scraps of clothing. He didn't stop until he found a rusted door and burst through it. And emerged back in the asylum basement. It was morning. He collapsed on the floor, weeping, but even as he did, part of him, just a tiny thread, felt something else. Hunger. The sun was rising when Gavin staggered out of the asylum grounds. He didn't remember the walk back, just cold air, whispers trailing behind him like shadows. His clothes were torn, and a faint, coppery smell clung to him. Blood. His memory felt slippery every time he tried to recall something simple, his phone number, his mother's face. It skittered away like a startled rat. He collapsed onto his motel bed. When he woke, it was dark again. Hours had passed, or days. The mirror in the room was fogged. He hadn't showered, hadn't eaten, but he could still hear them. Soft murmurs just behind the silence. "You brought us up. We need mouths." He screamed and threw the lamp at the mirror, shattering it. For a brief second, he saw his reflection staring back, unmoving, mouth curled in a grin. That wasn't him. He rushed to the bathroom and stared into the mirror. His eyes looked darker, not tired, wrong. There was something behind them now, a presence like a parasite coiled around his thoughts. In his notebook, his hands began to write without his permission. Gavin, more entry point, memory density, high echo amplification, stable. He dropped the pen in horror. He had become a host, a vessel. He remembered the missing people, how they'd been described by family and friends as not themselves before they vanished. He'd always assumed it meant depression, psychosis, or trauma. Now he knew. The thing beneath the asylum, the echo, didn't kill. It entered, fed, multiplied. That's why the whispers wanted him. That's why the LED him there. Because he could speak. He could write. He could spread. His phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "You saw it, didn't you?" Another message followed. "You're not the first, but you could be the last." Attached, an address. Midway Motel, Room 14, Ridge County. He drove. Not because he wanted to. Because the whisper told him to. Midway Motel sat at the edge of nowhere, just a crooked row of doors under a flickering neon sign. Room 14's curtains were drawn tight. Gavin's hands trembled as he knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Then, A bolt slid back, and the door cracked open just enough to reveal one bloodshot eye. "You alone?" the voice rasped. Gavin nodded. The door opened wider, and a woman in her 40s stepped back, pale skin, wild eyes, holding a stun baton in one hand. Inside click. He stepped in. The room was dimly lit and covered in chalk symbols, spirals, circles, words in Latin and Cyrillic on the wall. Dozens of newspaper clippings, notes, and photos were pinned in chaotic patterns. She locked the door. "I'm Claire," she said. "I was like you." Touch heard the voices. "I got free almost." Gavin's mouth was dry. "How?" She looked at him, then motioned to a scar running from her temple to her jaw. "They got in. I cut them out." He shivered. Claire moved fast, slamming a piece of obsidian stone into his hand. "Hold this. Tell me what you hear." Gavin gripped it tightly. For a moment nothing. Then, screams. "Too late," Claire whispered. "They're deeper in you than I thought." She handed him a file folder, brittle and yellow. Inside, photos from Grey Hollow Asylum, dating back to the 1950s. One face appeared again and again in the background. Same man, unchanged by time. "I call him the first host," Claire said. "He opened the gate. The voices need him to stay anchored, but if we break the chain, the echo dies." "Oh?" Gavin asked, though the part of him still untouched already knew. Claire looked at him with pity. "You have to go back." "No. You have to finish it." Suddenly, the whispers surged in Gavin's skull. He staggered back, nose bleeding, vision fracturing. "She's lying. She wants to trap you. Kill her." His hands twitched toward the lamp on the table. Claire saw it. "Fight it, Gavin." The whispers screamed, but he fought them just enough. He threw the lamp into the wall, not at Claire, and collapsed, clutching his head. She knelt beside him, whispering something old and sharp into his ear. A word. The voices hissed and retreated for now. Claire looked at him with something like sadness. "You won't survive down there again, but maybe that's the point." Grey Hollow stood like a rotting lung beneath the sky. Gavin crossed the threshold one last time, Claire's word etched into his palm. With a heated knife, his mind felt like paper soaked in oil, fragile, darkened, ready to burn. He didn't need the flashlight anymore. He remembered the path. Down the hallway, past the gate, into the shaft. The walls welcomed him, breathing again with that damp, living rhythm. At the bottom, the cavern waited. The pedestal stood empty now, but he felt the presence still all around. The echo had grown. In the distance, voices echoed, not whispers anymore, screams, familiar ones. Iris, Thomas, Claire, and himself. They were all here, looping, distorted. Then it emerged, not with foam, but with gravity. It dragged thought from his skull like steam from flesh. "You opened the gate. You brought them back. You are us." "No," Gavin whispered. "I remember who I am." The stone in his pocket, a shard of mirror from the motel, glowed faintly. He lifted it toward the center of the cavern. A sudden silence. The echo flinched. Reflections rippled across the walls. The chamber became a hall of mirrors, each one showing a version of himself, some twisted, corrupted, whispering with grins too wide. But one reflection, only one, was crying. He walked toward it. The others screamed, cracked, howled in hatred. But this one reached out. He touched the glass, and the cavern shattered. A burst of light, not bright but clarifying, surged outward. The voices became wind. The pedestal cracked in half, and the weight, the hunger, began to dissolve. The echo wasn't gone, but it was fragmented. And he awoke outside, on the asylum lawn, face pressed to earth. Morning had come. Claire stood over him, shocked. "You came back," she said. He nodded. "Not all of me, but enough." She helped him stand. "Can it still spread?" He looked at her, eyes dim but steady. "If someone listens long enough, yes." Then, he handed her the notebook. "Burn this," he said. "Every page." Claire hesitated, then took it. And as she walked away, Gavin sat on the steps of Grey Hollow, staring at the rising sun. But in the distance, in the hush between birdsong and breeze, a voice whispered softly, "Remember." He closed his eyes and smiled.